Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Barriers and Boundaries Resilience Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, DB, and today I have Nitin Goil with me all the way from Singapore. Excited to see you. How you doing, Nitin?
All right, thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, hello from rainy and a little bit cold Singapore, which is kind of strange.
A little unusual for a dip in the temperature. But no, thanks for joining me today. So Nitin and I, we go back a few years now. Just my time living in Singapore, and I had to rock my Singapore sweatshirt
Oh, yeah, that's pretty
today.
cool.
I didn't really have much of a chance to wear it in Singapore because it's just so hot and humid every
Yeah,
day, but
yeah.
take it into the movie theater with me every once in a while. I know we got through the Neuro Leadership Institute and connected there. Thanks for being a presence there. That was an exciting time for me. Now, just really excited to hear more about your work and what you've been up to lately on LinkedIn. And I love all your posts. Happy Monday motivation post. So I was kind of curious. We talk about organizational resilience on the podcast quite a bit, and I was curious to some of your thoughts on that because a lot of your work that I see and some of the highlights of your work. I want to give you the floor to explore some of that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Monday Wisdom, which kind of I started now probably about 6 months or so ago. I just like to write in general. So it started off just as for myself. What do I do to motivate myself, right? When we have those really dull and low days, I started to write certain things in my own diary to motivate myself just to getting up. And especially on Mondays, right? We have these mundane Mondays, not really look forward to at times. And And so I just realized that some of that motivation was a big driver for me, especially on Mondays, to just kick off the week with motivation. And so I said, okay, you know what? If I can get motivated by this, why not just put it out there? And that was kind of my thought on the Monday Wisdom, which I put out on LinkedIn every Monday. It still keeps me motivated when I read it, which is important. But I'm hoping that it all helps others as well. And thanks for reading it as well, because the goal is just
Yeah.
to spread that motivation across. Yeah.
And I noticed that a lot of them lately have leaned more towards being compassionate and kind, highlights the importance of connections. And that could be personal and organizational. I was wondering what some of your experience was and why that was important for you to focus on that.
I worked for some great organizations in the past. I've worked for some not so great organizations in the past, some great leaders and not so great leaders. And you kind of remember both of those experiences, right? Probably a lot more of the bad ones at times, because there's just so much of negativity, which is just kind of going around and stuff. So it's just kind of a reminder to you of what not to do when it comes to others. But I think it all starts with self, right? And that's my notion around that piece around compassion and just being kind to yourself, because it is about
Mm.
self-awareness. It is about, if you don't take care of yourself, then how are you going to take care of your teams, and how are you going to take care of the organization and the role you're in? So just yesterday, my Monday wisdom was really about the difference between a leader and a great leader. And I think I mentioned this point about self control, right? Because a great leader really has mastered that idea of self control, because the urge to really say something reactively sometimes just doesn't go very well, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about, how do you just not just have self control, but how are you aware of the impact you have on other people? Right. I have a 10-year-old son, and I often ask him for feedback. And actually, that's something I've learned over time, is when you're just asking people, and especially maybe kids, if you have your parents or just maybe friends or trusted colleagues, if you're asking for feedback that, hey, how am I doing? How did that go, and so forth, they'll really give you a lot of really great feedback in terms of, you know what, I think your tone was a little too harsh, or you were coming across as a little bit too aggressive, or you know what, you can be a better listener, which I get a lot at times, that, hey, maybe you could talk less and listen more.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we just need to be really honest with ourselves that we are not a perfect leader. We are not a perfect person. And it's just a work in progress. And it starts with that inner work, because I was a person who used to mask myself quite well, especially when I was in the US. Trying to fit in with the culture. I remember when I was a college student too, I was the only brown skinned boy in a predominantly white university. And I used to mask myself really well in terms of just showing people something I was not. And over time, I realized, hey, you know what? That's not the real me. It brought me in a very sad place. It just, brought me in a place where I was just not happy with myself. And so I think I just realized that being authentic is important, even if it's just one or two or very few people who actually like you or are in your inner circle. It doesn't matter. I think it is what is important is just being yourself, being kind to yourself. And
Yeah.
it's just that muscle which you need to flex every day in terms of self-awareness. It's just a work in progress. The more you flex, the stronger it is going to get.
That's it. That's it. And there's two or three points I wanted to highlight from what you just said. The first about the self-control. One of the worst things being in an office space was the leader who was like that emotional roller coaster. And your day, like you go to work each day and you're just like, I don't know how my day is going to be because I don't know
Mm,
how my boss is going to be. And that just highlights the importance of that self control as a leader coming in. Don't be that guy
yeah,
or woman, that's just the emotional roller coaster and the
yeah,
dynamic of the office space in that.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's a great point.
No, I was going to say that, people don't leave organizations for the organization. Most of the time, they're leaving organizations because of the leader. So the leader makes it or breaks it, right? And it's kind of like marriage. At times, I tell people it's like marriage, and it's actually arranged marriage more than more than anything else, because you don't have much say into, hey, I'm going to pick this boss or I'm going to pick this leader, right? So you're going into this marriage, you're now married, and it is really important. You're spending a lot of time together, right? Just like you would do in marriage. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think that control, I think focusing on your strengths, because the leader, if it is not a good leader or manager, will continuously tell you, hey, you're not good at this. And, the ego comes in and all of that. So you can have a lot of that self doubt in yourself. The imposter syndrome can come in. So I think just reminding yourself of your strengths. And sometimes I find, again, going back to writing it down and putting it where it's visually where you can see it, I think is very, very important as well. Because we forget in that moment, you're just like, oh my God, I'm just horrible. No, you're not.
I had an interview recently. I'm in the process of transitioning careers, and I've been interviewing a lot lately, thankfully. And one of the interviewers, she made a point to ask me something about myself personally because she was aware of kind of who she is, and she
Hmm.
thought that there might be tension in that certain aspect of who we are. On one hand, I applauded the audacity, for her to ask that because that was very courageous of her to ask that because that could be, for the wrong person, that could be look at it kind of insensitive.
Yeah.
But just her audacity to ask that, I was like, at least she kind of knows who she is. She wants the dynamic of the environment to be okay. So I applauded it. At the same time, I was like, man, she asked the wrong person that could be dangerous. You talked about parenting. One of the things about when you're a kid, you don't look at your parents as still developing as people. Like, oh no,
Mm,
your parents know, no, they know who they are. That's who they are.
mm,
And like, you don't think about the aspect of they're still maturing, they're still
mm.
growing. And then that's the way I interpreted what you were saying. Like, no, the leader's still developing. You still need the self-awareness piece of what could I learn in that moment, that engagement. I
Yeah.
just want to highlight that as well. That's a brilliant point to highlight.
I think that work in progress is a very important one. And you look at some great leaders out there right now who are leading with that mentality that, you know what, I made a mistake. Here's what I'm going to do, right? In terms of changing that and just being real and just being honest with the team, the organization, and people in general. So I think gone are the days where you can just fake it and you can just basically put down that self that, you know what, I've done this before, I've earned this, this is my title, this is where I am. That whole idea of even if you've reached the top and you can be the CEO of the greatest organization in today's time, in today's context, I have a lot of respect for a leader like Satya Nadella, for example, at Microsoft. And in this new age of leadership, I recognize that aspect of empathy and compassion, at least the way he goes about leading. And so he's not really a loud leader. He is more of a quiet leader. But he's doing that with that aspect of, I still haven't figured out a lot of things, and I need people to tell me those things as well. That openness is amazing in terms of what you can do. So I think we ought to do that a
You
lot more.
beat me to the punch of my next question of,
Oh.
what have you seen organizations do really well that support the healthy work environment?
Mm. As a lot of people are now pushing back for people to go back into the office, that's a trend we are seeing. Even in Singapore, I think it's close to about 30% of organizations are looking back into having people come back to the office and so forth. People are feeling a little bit threatened, I guess, in terms of their own autonomy, because you do have a lot of autonomy and flexibility in general if you're just working from anywhere, whether it's your home or a remote place and so forth. That's something organizations are still figuring out in terms of how do we really not just get people back, but also keep that engagement with people. What's the right number in terms of giving people autonomy, just enough autonomy, but that keeping that engagement at a rate. Gallup still talks about, I think, 59% of employees are still into that quiet quitting, not engaged kind of a phase. So that's real, right? And I feel that's going to just probably stay stable or even might increase as well. In the US, the president of SHRM, Johnny Taylor, said empathy is at an all time low in the US. Here, it's a little bit better in terms of Asia and even Singapore. But that all kind of adds up to this aspect of well being, that people are feeling exhausted. People
Mm.
are feeling really exhausted. I mean, the pandemic was exhausting, but close to 53% of people are still feeling quite exhausted now than ever before. And I think it's an effect of post-pandemic too. Like, you know what, we had slowed down, let's accelerate things, bring people back. We don't have enough trust and all. So that's creating a lot of anxiety, and that adds up to your well-being.
What would you say to someone who is just coming out of school? They get that position of leadership. Maybe they didn't
Mm,
go through the pandemic and they're not
mm,
exhausted and they have a
yeah,
lot of energy. What do you say for approaching developing your own leadership style in that regard, or someone
yeah.
that's just new out the gate?
Yeah, and I do a lot of coaching and mentoring with young leaders, and you're absolutely right. They're bright, and they're excited, take on the world, and all of that stuff. So I think a couple of things. I say one, find a good mentor, right? To your point, you don't know who you're going to be working for, right? And that person can make it and break it in terms of your first experience. Finding a good mentor even before you enter the workplace is very, very critical. Right? And I'm a huge proponent of mentorship. Mentorship is powerful. I still am in touch with my first mentor from the US, and I continue to really benefit from mentoring. That aspect of learning from others, even before you come into the workplace, I think would be number one. Number two, again, is a lot of clarity. So asking some really good questions before you enter the workforce or you take on that role in terms of what exactly is the expectations, what am I getting myself into? Ask some really tough questions. And now we are living in a AI powered world. So it is a lot more easy to generate some of those really powerful questions. You just mentioned the one person you interviewed with. She asked you that personal question and so forth, which took you by surprise. But I think it's about asking those tough questions, getting that clarity so that there are no surprises when you take on that role and you are into that organization, right? And then number three, I would say, is the aspect of reflection time. I call it reflection time, but really spending that time on yourself, right? In terms of, again, thinking about your own strengths, in terms of what you're good at, what you want to work on, and so forth. So you have that clarity. What motivates you? So you're excited right now to take on the world, you're excited to enter the workforce, and so forth. But what's going to continue that excitement for you? A little bit of growth mindset or that aspect of lifelong learning that has to continue to take place. So how do you continue to stay motivated? And a lot of it is your own me time in terms of, I'm going to devote 30 minutes in a day to just focus on my own development because nobody else will. And I'll continue to do that as you start work or you enter the workforce. Those three or so things I would say would be my recommendation for somebody who's coming in to keep that energy sustained, keep that positivity sustained as they enter the workforce.
That's excellent. What qualities in a mentor do you think someone should look for when
Mm,
they're trying to figure that out?
a person who absolutely is a good listener, right? So listening is a pretty, and by listening, I mean listening to understand, because a lot of people listen and they confuse listening with hearing. That's not the case, right? So a good
It's a great
mentor really,
distinction.
yeah, a good mentor really, I mean, the one I'm still in touch with about what, 20, 25 years now. She's a great listener and she listens to understand. So she will wait for me to finish off and then start asking some clarifying questions and not giving me advice necessarily, but just pushing me to think about things I've not thought about. So I think that aspect of listening to understand would be very, very important. Somebody who's definitely experienced, right? Somebody who is also authentic, going back to that point of somebody who doesn't mask themselves, who doesn't lead by title, but leads by self in a way in terms of how they are, who they are, and so forth. So authenticity
Takes courage.
takes courage.
It
Absolutely.
takes courage. Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to really show up truly if you're going to be mentoring somebody in terms of, hey, you know what, I didn't figure this out and I still haven't figured it out. So in case you're asking me this question, maybe somebody else would be a good person to go to and stuff. So just that honesty, that authenticity would be important and stuff. And I think the third would be somebody who is compassionate, right, who has that kindness in them as well, who doesn't judge you by who you are and so forth, but really treats you as a human. So for me, that humanness, that human factor is very, very important. And over time, I've just started to see that organizations are really becoming less human. And it's about time that we start to really think about how do we really bring that humanness back in organizations, especially with all of the toxicity and all of the negativity which is happening around, with all the AI which is driving workforces today. It's a lot more critical and critically important to bring that humanness back front and center. Yeah.
My last organization that I work for, we had a human factors council that I was a member of. I was one of
Wow.
the key members of it. And what we would do is every month we would get together and we would just talk about situations with employees, not like a gossip way, but in a way like what are the resources, one, what are the things that we know about going on in the lives of our employees?
Yeah.
And then two, what are the resources that we have to help them out?
Yeah.
Do we have a therapist, a counselor, a fund, some organization that provides a interest-free loan or anything like
Yeah.
that we could connect them to if it was just a burden on them? Leaders being very vulnerable, like, yeah, I didn't see
Yeah.
this coming. I
Yeah.
wish I would have known about this earlier before
Yeah.
it got to this point. So there was a lot
Yeah.
of vulnerability. But that level of
Mm,
clarity for us to have as leaders, that just made the whole organization better.
yeah. And you're lucky. I mean, you had that opportunity, and I wish more and more organizations, and that's really my purpose now, to be honest, is really bringing that back and really getting involved in that kind of work now, because I just feel I experienced it and I know that how my results got affected and I know how the organizational results got affected as well. So if we can improve that just by turning up that humanness factor a little bit more, why not? Right.
Do you sense that organizations, or how have you seen organizations be resistant to engaging their own resilience?
And in fact, I have a book coming out, my first book, next month, which is kind of going to be talking about this because there is this.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is that polarity of you can be human centered and you can be results oriented or results driven. There is this misconception organizations have because if you're too much on that results driven side, which is fine, you start to lose that human centered aspect or that humanist aspect. You're going to create a lot of toxicity and a lot of toxic environments within the organization, right? But if you're too much on the human side as well, which a lot of organizations are at times, you lose that sense of being results driven and being results focused and stuff. So I think it's a balance of how do you balance that
Yeah.
humanness with being results driven and being results oriented. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, sometimes just see the humanist factor as just soft skills or just good to have and so forth. I absolutely disagree. And I think the resistance organizations have is, well, show me how that kind of affects my bottom line and my top line, right? if we can show the data, and then through the book, we interviewed a bunch of organizations, close to more than 100 organizations. We gathered the data and we said, you know what, this human factor, and there's six ways where we have said that you can really create that aspect of humanizing workforces, but at the same time also drive results. And we have used case studies and examples of organizations who have done it. The data is there where if you do both, you can still be a great organization, and you can really deliver results.
Oh, that's great. I look forward to the book coming out. That sounds very exciting. One of the aspects that I like to focus on here is just acknowledging that people are bringing more than their time to the workplace. They're
Mm,
investing who they
mm,
are.
mm.
And so to hear you talk about, yeah, let's acknowledge who they are.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
people, and
that's
not to
right.
go overboard, finding that balance, not to go overboard, but there's at least some like human decency at the core level. So that's I'm very excited to hear you talk about that. I look forward to the book coming out.
We take pride at times in terms of overworking people. I'm not quite sure if it happens in the US, but yes, probably it's a global kind of a pattern. In Asia, definitely that's the case, whether you look at countries like China, even India, or even Japan and some other countries where we are overworking people. Let's just get as much as possible from people. But I think to your point, if we don't recognize them as humans, then I think it's just going to be a matter of time. Either they collapse or we're just going to lose them, because employees are getting smarter as well. They have a lot of choices in today's time. And so it's like, okay, you know what? This is not working out. I'm going to leave. And that span is getting shorter and shorter. People are leaving organizations within less than a year because they're like, this is not for me. And these
Mm.
are millennials, these are Gen Zs is going to be soon joining the workforce as well. And so I think it's going to be like, if you don't recognize that human element, that aspect of purpose, what gives people meaningfulness at work, you're going to lose people. And and sometimes it could be good performers as well, high performing employees who are going to leave organizations too. So I think that acknowledgement, but at the same time also not just as them as humans, but acknowledgement of the work has to be there too. That connectiveness to the meaning of work and the purpose has to be there as well.
I've noticed during some of these interviews, some have been very focused on soft skills, problem solver,
Mm,
ability to make decisions,
mm,
things that are not necessarily the technical skills.
mm.
One of them I was very impressed with, where the first interview was just the soft skills, interpersonal skills, but then the second was, hey, we're going to pull up this software. We want to see how well you can do with the software. And I felt like it was a good
Contrasting.
balance
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of like, hey, we want to hear how you manage situations, but we also want to see that you have the skills to do it. I love both sides of the coin there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that aspect of accountability comes in as well. So we are going to have you accountable for the human factor or for that humanness, but we are going to have you accountable for the results as well, right? In terms of that, because at the end of it, if we don't deliver results, we are going to not make money and we are going to not be an organization. So I think it's important to have that aspect too, but balance is key. Just like balance in
Yeah.
yourself as well. As
Yeah.
humans, we need to have strive for as much balance as possible.
Nice. I want to kind of back up some more to just who you are in general. So I noticed you've been traveling, you've been speaking at some events.
I've been speaking quite a lot on empathy in general in organizations, in leaders. I've been speaking quite a lot on change, the extent of change which is happening today, or even last year we experienced was tremendous, and change is going to happen a lot this year as well. So with change comes a lot of excitement for a lot of folks, but also comes a lot of anxiety with people as well. I've been talking a lot with how do you manage that aspect of change, but bringing that human is back as well. Like, how do you take care of yourself as well? Because if you don't take care of yourself in terms of your well-being, nobody else would. So I've been talking a lot about well-being. I've been talking a lot about managing change, empathy, this aspect of just learning, and just having that learning agility is also very, very
Mm.
critical as well. So it's just been quite a bit on that humanness factor. And then inclusivity has been showing up. I know D&I has been dialed down, especially in organizations in the US quite a lot. Not so much here in Asia, but I feel that inclusion is going to stay pretty consistent throughout. So not so much diversity and equity and focusing on that, but inclusion in general. And I'm passionate about creating inclusivity in organizations,
Yeah.
creative inclusive cultures, and so forth. So I've been speaking quite a lot on how to really drive better inclusivity, which also means recognizing who you are, right, in terms of that human
Yeah.
aspect.
I was wanting to see if I could get you to talk more about learning agility. That sounds very dynamic.
Learning agility, at times we may also say growth mindset and stuff, but I think it's just, if you're not agile in this environment or this extent of change that we are experiencing, then I think you're going to be hard and you're going to be falling behind. So it's aspect of just not just learning, but also bouncing back from things which you didn't do well, right? So that quickness of bouncing back is about having that agility to really embrace something next and then just learn something faster and stuff. So the quicker you can bounce back, the quicker you can recognize that you didn't do that well or you failed in that, and let me learn something quickly, the quicker you're going to just deal with the situation better. Again, going back, it's a muscle which you need to continuously flex, even not just at work but at home, in your personal life, with your family as well. Is continuously, how are you flexing in terms of learning new things, even though you may not be perfect in things, but how do you just learn from those failures?
And that, going back to the balance piece, when you want a learning organization, you want that learning agility. There on one side, there's the leaders have to set that as the expectation, as the
Hmm.
culture. But then
Hmm.
there also needs to be the frontline managers of the shared experiences happening at the same time. The experiences and the expectations need to match up.
That's right. Yeah. So I think that's
Yeah.
an alignment thing which you mentioned, because I think and that's what goes back to that point about clarity of roles and clarity of expectations when you're first joining an organization, not just for a new person, but anybody who is also experienced, somebody like you who is going back to the workforce again and looking at jobs and stuff. I think that aspect of aligning on expectations. What do I expect from a culture, from an organization, and what does the organization expect of me? Most of the times that misalignment is where it gets you in trouble, and you realize, oh my God, this is not a learning culture, for example, right? Or this is not a listening culture. It's more of a talk down culture, or it's a one way
It
street. And you're like, oh my God, why didn't I pick this up early on?
it's definitely something that I'm trying to pay attention to when I go through interviews, because I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me. How can listeners, those viewing, stay in touch with you? What's the best way to stay connected to what's going on with you?
I think the best way is LinkedIn. I have made this habit of writing every day. I write a lot, so LinkedIn is the best way, where I'm putting up a lot of my own articles and what's coming up now with the book as well. And the book is
Can't wait
called
for
The
that.
Restored. Yeah, the book is called The Restored Organization, and it's all about restoring that humanness back in organizations while still being results driven. All that information is going to be on LinkedIn. So connect me on LinkedIn, and drop me a message. Happy to, chat with folks and see in what way
I'll
I
I'll
can
put the
help.
links in as well. No, that'd be great. I love the material that you're putting out there, and I think it's very relevant for this time. I don't think empathy is ever not relevant for
Yeah,
self awareness and compassion.
yeah.
Thank you for your time. It's amazing how fast these conversations go by when you get into it. But
Thank
I
you.
just want to thank you. Yeah, no, thanks so much, and look forward to the book when that comes out, and look forward to see what else you get up to in the coming days.
Thank you for the opportunity, and wish you the very best as well in your own journey, and wish you the
Thank you.
best for 2025 and the listeners as well. Have a great year. Stay healthy. Take care of yourself. And I'll just leave you with a famous quote by Maya Angelou, one of my favorite poets. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So
Love it.
go with that aspect of join organizations, make organizations great by making people feel great and making people feel human.
Love it.
Wish
Love it.
everybody the best.
It's great encouragement. Thank you. And we're going to keep fighting, keep pressing, keep fighting a good fight here. And until next time, be out here.